Hello all, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek radio-controlled Panther Ausf.G. Since the last video update, work has been done to the turret and the turret is now complete. We will go over the various additions that were made to the turret in this video. As I mentioned in earlier videos, the model did not come with the gun barrel. This was because of the previous builder. However, I was able to obtain a factory original Armortek Panther barrel direct from Armortek.com. Special thanks again to Jill over at Armortek for the customer support. We are at this point of the build where it's time to install the barrel. The barrel itself is very nicely done and is comprised of both the barrel and the muzzle brake. The barrel installation is all thread on assembly. The muzzle brake is also a separate piece of the gun and threads on, as you see here. The barrel itself is all made out of CNC steel, has the taper to it, which is very accurate. The barrel is very nicely done and the threads are very well machined and require no cleanup or any sort of modifications made to them in order to get the piece to thread on properly. As for the muzzle itself, the muzzle brake is nicely done. It's all comprised out of one-piece CNC'd aluminum and has the correct shape and dimensions. One thing of note of all these Armortek models that I've personally seen, they are not all the way drilled out. There is this little honeycomb little ridge on the interior. This honeycomb ridge is obviously not there on the real vehicle and is most likely done as a safety precaution for Armortek. Most likely illustrating that the muzzle here, or that the gun on the model is purely just is a non-functional replica and is not an actual firearm. Like with my other Armortek builds, I always drill out the muzzle brake for greater accuracy. Also on the barrel, because of the CNC manufacture, there are several machine marks, which are that of small little ribs and ridges that run along the entire length of the barrel. These ridges are left over from the tooling and are very minute, but however can still be seen after the model is painted. It's hard to get it in frame. However, if I run my hand up and down the barrel, you could hear it. To eliminate these ribs, it's a very simple procedure. You just have to go up and down the barrel with some sandpaper, and these ridges will then be blended in. After the ridges are blended in, the barrel will be primed and then installed. To drill out the honeycomb stopper that's in the muzzle to make it more realistic, I'm going to be utilizing the lathe. To do the procedure, I simply put the muzzle into the chuck, and I have a 1/2 inch drill bit in the tailstock. I'm going to simply just use the 1/2 inch drill bit just to bore out directly through the muzzle in a nice linear fashion. As of note, the hole in the muzzle is just a hairline smaller than the 1/2 inch drill bit, so the 1/2 inch drill bit is going to enlarge the hole a slight amount. However, it's not going to be nearly noticeable once the operation is completed. Out of aluminum, this is going to be a very simple process and will be easily drilled. I will now add some lubrication to the bit and start the drilling. And we are now through. Removing the muzzle from the chuck. All the sawdust out, or shavings. And now the hole is completely bored out of the muzzle. And here we have the completed reworked gun muzzle. As you can see, since the previous scene, the interior baffle ring were added. The baffle rings themselves are fabricated out of turned PVC and are machined would have the wrench slits just like they are found on the actual vehicle. Also added to the muzzle was the securing cap. On these typical on German gun muzzles, the muzzle would be threaded onto the collar of the barrel itself, and then there would be a small little retaining nut that would be on this little plate here. This plate would lock into the threads, and then this bolt here would secure it to the muzzle. This plate here prevented the muzzle from being able to rotate while it's secured to the gun. For the modification or the addition of this piece, I had to go ahead and put the muzzle itself into a milling machine, and with a milling bit I simply just milled out the little recess for the securing tab. Also added to the ring are the wrench slits. These wrench slits here, this part here is actually a collar, and after first you would thread on the collar, then you would thread on the muzzle. You would then tighten or bring the collar closer to the muzzle, thus tightening it and keeping it nice and secure from it getting loosened on you, especially when the gun is actually firing. The last thing you would want is the muzzle moving on you in action. The muzzle itself, once the last mods were added, was put in its final prime, and in this condition now, it will be fitted to the barrel. As what was mentioned in a previous video of this build, the previous builder went ahead and mounted the elevation system. However, he never completed it. The elevation system is as follows. You have the bracket here with a long threaded rod. This long threaded rod connects to a geared motor, which is this system over here. The threaded rod connects to the geared motor, and then this bracket here with the two limit switches gets fitted to those 4 holes there in the front portion of the turret. The way it works, as was described in a previous video, was that when you hit the radio command, it will activate the motor, which in turn will either raise or lower the gun via this threaded rod. Once the barrel hits a certain length, it will make impact with the restrictor switch, cutting off power and only allowing you to then move the gun in the opposite direction until it hits the other restrictor switch, which will then cause a vice versa effect. The actual function of this system is showcased in a previous video. While fitting the limit switch bracket to the turret, found out a little hiccup that the model has. The hiccup is that the quick connect that we have here that is on the terminal gets in the way of the bracket here. Keep in mind of the Panther's angles. Because of the way the Panther turret angles inward, there's more room on the bottom than on the top. Because of that, there's so little clearance up here that if you have the jack in the vertical position as it's supposed to be intended, you're going to make contact with the wall, which will throw off the alignment of the holes. To get around that was a simple fix. What I did was I just took a simple strip of 1/4 inch brass and I soldered it to the lead of the switch. I soldered the strip in a 90-degree angle, and because of that, when I insert the jack, if we notice, it juts out to the side rather than vertical. This small little modification makes ample clearance into the turret, which now I can install the piece and the holes will line up perfectly. Similar to the procedure that was done to the turret rotation motor gearbox mounting that's in a previous video, it's also important for the gun elevation motor mount not to move or have any play in it. To do this, we did it again. I used a similar mounting procedure. We have the 2 fasteners here which secure the motor mount plate to the turret. On the bolts themselves, we have sandwiched a lock washer and a regular flat washer. The combination of the 2 washers, once tightened, will prevent the bolts from getting loose and will also help prevent any play into the motor mount plate. As we can see, the mount is nice and sturdy and will not move around on you, which means that all of the motor's rotation force will go into elevating the gun. This procedure is done to not only the motor mount plate, but to also the switch mount plate, which is mounted directly adjacent from it. And here goes the gun elevation system fully mounted and assembled. Over here is the turret turning motor gearbox, and over here are the limit switches. Here is the threaded rod, which actually does the work of elevating and depressing the gun. If we notice, mounted on either side of the plate here are two green plastic discs. These discs are to prevent the brass bushing from rotating either left and right due to the rotation of the threaded shaft. This again focuses the energy in a linear fashion, which forces the gun to go up and down. The kit original had two aluminum metal discs that were intended for these two locations. Unfortunately, the metal discs were not found in the parts that were supplied with this partially built kit, so two new ones had to have been fabricated. The plastic discs do the exact same job as their metal counterparts and prevent the brass bushing from yawing. To test the gun, I'll first turn on the radio as always. I'll then turn on the tank. And on the tank, as we could recall, this toggle here rotates the turret, while this one here elevates the gun. This is lowering the gun. It will soon hit the impact switch, just like that. Now, because of the impact switch is depressed, no matter how much I press on the radio, the motor will not activate to lower the gun any further. However, the gun will only now be able to go in the reverse direction, like this. And there we go, it hit the other impact switch. Just like with the reverse direction, no matter how much I tell the radio to turn the motor, it will not unless I go into the opposite direction, like so. And there we have it. The only thing I would personally add to the action to smooth it up a bit would probably be to add a drop of oil into the threaded rod for the gun elevation. Other than that, the system is now complete. The previous builder assembled the Cupola. However, he did not assemble it properly in that the Periscope's inserts were just simply inserted into the Cupola as such without any glues or adhesives. So the pieces were just held in place by the Periscope guard. Because of that, the Periscopes jiggled on the inside. Another thing that he did was on the Periscope guards themselves, the ones that hold up the machine gun ring, he only assembled everything via adhesives and glues. If we see the first video of this project, you'll see what I'm talking about. Because of that, the entire mount and mounting system literally just crumbled in my hands. I will be redoing this setup, and instead of using adhesives, I'll be using solder, which will hold the pieces on a lot more sturdier. The whole kit layout is very similar to that of the King Tiger that I built from Armortek about 2 years ago, and the detailing is all there. However, it's very basic. For instance, there is no interior detailing on the interior portion here of the Cupola drum, and on the hatch, they just have the hatch fitted to the Cupola via a bolt. And if you know anything about the real Panther or these type of hatches, is that it's supposed to be a smooth cylinder, and the piece actuates up and down on that. Also, the top detailing needs to be replaced. There are, I believe, on the real tank, sunken slot screws that hold the whole assembly together. On the interior portion of the hatch, I went ahead and started rebuilding it or smoothing it out with a two-part epoxy. These hatches are, the masters I believe are made out of 3D printed material, and kit dates back a few years, so you actually see the 3D printing ribs. That's what were really present on the inside. So instead of sanding it down, I just went ahead and covered it up with the epoxy, leaving a nice cast look that you see here. And here goes the copula after the detail rework. As you can see, the texture of the cast has been added to the copula's drum, which does enhance the look of the model. Not only was the exterior of the hatch, or of the copula, detailed, so was the interior. If we recall from the earlier scene, the interior drum was completely smooth on the inside and was missing all of these casted-in mounts that are present on Panther copula drums. This is all hand sculpted in by hand, and once completed, the interior was painted and the periscopes were reaffixed to the model. The periscopes are the same ones from before and have only been repainted and then mounted. Unlike the previous builder, these periscopes are firmly attached to the model instead of wobbling around loose as they were prior. On the top portion here of the copula, we have a ring which has headrests for the tank commander. This is common on all German tanks, and the Tiger I as well as the King Tiger have a similar type headrest system inside their drum copulas. On the bottom portion here of the commander's hatch, we have a headrest for the tank commander. This is also scratch built and added to the copula itself. On this portion here, I fabricated a small handle locking system. The locking system is functional. However, as a note, the real Panther had a threaded type system where the tank commander would crank this handle here, which would, via screws, open up the hatch. However, because you need to open the hatch from the exterior of the model, it was impractical for me to go ahead and add the threadings. So I just have a smooth portion here, and once the hatch is in the open configuration, you will not be able to see the threads when the hatch is open. Just like the real hatch, it does swing and has a bump stop over there to keep it from overextending, which then also has another alignment nub here which helps the hatch slide back into its proper location and indexing. If we remember from the previous scene, the hatch itself has bolts that secure everything together. These were revised, and instead of the bolts being exposed, they were countersunked and were covered up by these two resin discs. These resin discs mimic that of large slot screws which are present on the real vehicle. The periscopes, after mounting, then had their guards added. The guards are the Armortek kit originals, and then when mounted have their well-bead detailing sculpted into them. In addition to the well-bead detailing, their backs were also added and were missing on the original Armortek kit. The backings are all made out of sheet metal and are fixed to the guard via soldered. The soldering actually, in addition to holding it to the plate, adds a nice little bit of weld detail that is also present on the real vehicle. In addition to the periscope guards, the anti-aircraft rail and rail mounts were also fabricated. The rail mounts are fabricated out of brass strip and are soldered to the metal, leaving for a nice strong bond. Unfortunately, you cannot solder the ring to the brass because on the Panther kit, this ring here is made out of aluminum, and aluminum is not a solderable metal. So instead of just having it glued in place like the previous builder, I went ahead and drilled holes into the bottom of each of these brass plates and soldered in a brass pin. The brass pin is firmly affixed to the brass plate and is nice and sturdy. With the brass pin in place, I then drilled small little holes on the indexing points here of the aluminum rail, and then that rail was then glued directly to the plates. After the rail was glued to the pins, sculpted weld beads were added with epoxy. The epoxy not only adds detail, but also gives a little bit more strength. The rail itself is much more durable than the previous builder's attempt, and if we recall, his version just literally crumbled in its place. With the mount nice and secure, you can go ahead and affix the aftermarket metal MG34 anti-aircraft mount that we have here. this mount here is an aftermarket piece. I'm not sure who the source is. However, the piece is very nicely detailed and is highly recommended. In addition to the addition of the aftermarket MG34 machine gun mount, we have here the addition of an aftermarket sight vane. Just like on the Shermans, the Panther has a sight vane for the commander, and this here would be on the forwardmost periscope. That's what this little casted-in bulge is here, is for mounting of the sight vane. Sight vane itself, again, is an aftermarket accessory. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure which aftermarket supplier is the one that offers this component here. As far as detailing the top plate of the turret, top plate's pretty simple. There's not really a whole bunch of stuff going on here, detail-wise, on these Panthers. However, I did make some modifications to the top plate. For one, all of the countersunk mounting holes, which were originally intended to bolt the top plate to the turret, were filled in and replaced. This is again because of the Magnalock system that I have fitted. On the air filter, it was mounted to the turret permanently, and sculpted weld bead details were added. On the real Panther, this ring here actually was bolted to the turret from the underneath, and then was welded. To simulate the underneath welds, or the underneath bolts, I went ahead and drilled out small little divots in each of these little slots here. With those divots drilled out, it replicates the under bolt detail, especially once the model is painted. Another addition that I made, or modification I made to the top turret, was the modification of the close-in support weapon. Like all second generation and third generation German tanks, they all had a close-in support weapon. These vehicles would be like the Tiger II, the late production Tiger I, as well as the Panthers. What this device did was it replaced the external S-mines that are found on the early Tiger I hull, and also replaced the external smoke trajectors, which we see on the Tiger I, as well as on the Panzer IV and Panzer III. This system here is actually similar to that on the M4 Sherman, which launched smoke grenades. In the additional smoke grenades, you could also launch fragmentation charges. Unlike the versions on the Sherman, the versions on the German tanks were actually pivotable, and you could get a different arc of movement. I decided to make this functional on the client's build by connecting the close-in support mortar to a servo, which is affixed to the top plate here. The close-in support component itself is the kit original, but has been modified to have the small slot screws for mounting like we have on the real models, or on the real vehicle. And a small PVC ring was machined to fit and act as a bushing to allow the components to spin freely via the servo. The servo itself is hooked up to the bow machine gun servo, and both systems will turn on the same channel in unison, giving for a little bit more animation to the model when it's moving. Like the rest of my commission build models, I always sign and date the piece. I always do this on the interior portion of the model, or in a place which is not visible. On this Panther, that is going to be on the interior portion here of the model's turret. One benefit of having the roof removable is that I can hook up all of the jacks and other equipment to the model's RC equipment without having to dangle the turret and have another person hook it up for me. This way, I could hook everything up, and then once everything's hooked up, I could then pop the roof onto the model, thus completing it. With all of the jacks now hooked up, the top lid will simply get locked into place via the magnets. And there we go. If we notice, just like on the top deck, the weld detailing was added to the rim of the plate. This covers up the seam where the turret plate meets the roof. The welds are present on the real vehicle and added to the model give it some nice detail. However, where the welds are do not affect how the plate is removed, so that the seam is very slight, if not unnoticeable, once the model is fully painted. Some added on details include the glare guard, or also it could be a splash guard, as well as the bump stop that's on the top portion here of the mantle. The bump stop here is a piece of plastic square that has been glued and then welded with the epoxy to the turret. It's not included in the kit, however the kit does have the little notch cut out in the mantlet cover guard here for this little bump stop. So it's a simple addition. On the rear portion of the turret, modifications were made to the hatch and the hatch area. The previous builder fully Zemorited the entire plate here. However, the builder requested me to have this area removed, as he has seen in several of his reference images. The Zemorit was sanded and chipped away, relieving or showing off the bare metal left underneath. Simulated welds were added to the splash rim, and the hatch locking clip over here has been fully reworked. It started off as the kit original, but the kit original was kind of under detailed and was a little bit blocky in appearance. The edges were filed down to give it the proper appearance. The two little hinge simulated nubs over here were turned on a lathe and then added to the piece. The clip is non-functional, however has the detailed appearance as if it is. On the top portion here of the clip, we have a small little brass release lever that is bolted to the clip. On the real tank, to release the clip from the hatch, you would lift up with your finger on this little latch here, and that would actuate the clip, thus releasing the loader's hatch so it can close. The hatch itself is detailed. What was added was the Allen locking mechanism here. This was an addition that was not part of the original kit. The hatch is fully opening. This is as per the kit original. The hatch interior detailing is all fabricated. Now, because of the way the hatch is designed, I was not able to fully detail it the proper way. To do this, I would have to totally redesign the hinge mechanism, and on this build, it would have added more time to it, which is not a luxury I have at the moment. So rather than having to redesign the entire hatch, I simply gave it a facelift of detailing, which replicates the real hatch. However, it's not fully functional. On the real hatch, this lever here would actuate the two locking lugs, which would secure the hatch to the deck or to the rear plate. And over here, we have a small little tang, and that little tang is what the hatch latch over there would clip onto. Again, none of these details are functional. It's just there for visual detail when you open up the hatch. Once the model gets painted, the hatch will be colored Dunkel Gelb, just like the rest of the base coat. As well as what was also fabricated was the loader's hatch grab handle. On the rear deck here of the Panther, to assist with getting in and outside of the loader's hatch, a handle was affixed to the top deck, or to the plate here on the turret. The little handle here is all fabricated out of brass and is secured to the model via these steel pins. Everything is glued together, and simulated welds were added to both add detail and to add in strength. And here goes the close-in support weapon being powered by the model. Turn on the radio, the tank again. And that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek Panther Ausf.G. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 scale tank builds, as well as other 1/6 scale detail components. Thank you.